Hi, my name is Rusty Holmes, and this video is to share some of the research I've done in my doctoral degree at the University of Texas in Austin, Texas. Just so you have a little bit of context for the creation of this video, today is March 28th, 2020, and because of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, we are currently under orders of shelter in place, which means that my lecture recital, which was originally scheduled for a couple of days from now, is no longer able to happen. So I feel very fortunate to be able to share this video with an online audience, and I hope that after you watch this video, you are as excited as I am about our topic today, and that is Denise Tryon and her contributions to the solo repertoire for low horn. In this video, you'll understand that first, there was a distinct style of writing for the low horn player, and that this distinction was erased as the horn gained valve technology in the 19th century. Throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century, repertoire for the low horn player remained largely unexplored. There has been a resurgence in interest and specialization in the low register of the horn in the past 20 years or so, and a ringleader in commissioning solo pieces for the low hornist is Denise Tryon. While she doesn't need a grand introduction for a lot of you, I do want to take the time to introduce her and her works for those of you who are not familiar with her, and show why she's being so successful in advocating for the low register of the horn, as well as promoting these solo pieces. And finally, I want to tell you a little bit about the 4 low horn commissions on Denise Tryon's album Solo, which was released in 2015. These commissions have started to gain a lot of recognition recently, but I still think that because they're relatively new works, a lot of horn players just aren't familiar enough with them yet to actually program them on recitals. So I want to introduce these pieces to you, tell you a little bit about them, and also let you know where you need to be at in your own low horn playing to be able to play these pieces. So way back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean the early 1700s, the horn was a single length of tube, it did not have the valves yet, and it was called the Wald horn. The Wald horn did have one major improvement from what preceded it, the hunting horn, in that it had a tuning slide. The hunting horn before could only be used in music dramas and operas and hunting scenes. But now that the Wald horn had a tuning slide, it could be more easily incorporated into the orchestra. The horn plays notes on the harmonic series, and an easy definition of the harmonic series is all of the notes you can play on one length of tube. One note on the harmonic series is called a harmonic, a partial, or an overtone. The partials on the harmonic series are numbered from the bottom to the top. At the bottom of the harmonic series, the partials are further apart, and as you go higher, they get closer together. So this might sound like a lot of information, but basically, here's what it means. If I play partials numbers 2, 3, and 4, it sounds like this. Between the second and third partial is a fifth, and between the third and the fourth is a fourth. As you go higher in the harmonic series, these gaps get closer together. Until you reach partial number 8, and then past there, you have the intervals of a second, and so it's really easy to make melodies. It was in this range that the composer started writing for the horn. The style of music was called clarino, and a great example of this is J.S. Bach's Mass in B minor. You can click on the link on your screen and it will take you to a YouTube video of an excerpt of Bach's Mass in B minor. There's a movement that features the horn player, and you can see in the video that the horn player is playing the horn in the traditional style by playing without his hand in the bell and on a single length of tube, navigating the open partials of the harmonic series to make the melodies. Around the middle of the 18th century, experiments were taking place to make the horn a fully chromatic instrument, and thus hand horn technique was born. This was a method of manipulating the right hand and the bell of the instrument to create muffled tones in addition to the open tones so that horn players could play a fully chromatic scale. The horn's role in the orchestra and as a solo instrument was elevated by the hand horn technique. And at this point, the horn's range was over 4 octaves, so players began to specialize in neither producing the high notes or the low notes. They even began to use different equipment to be better suited in each range. This means that high horn players and low horn players had a completely different skill set, and they couldn't necessarily switch parts back and forth like modern horn players can today. To avoid the implications of using first and second horn, the terms cor alto and cor bass were used to indicate the high horn player and the low horn player in the section. And while the cor alto player played music that was pretty much already in existence, like the Clorino range that you heard in the Bach example, music for the low horn player or the cor bass player was in a completely new and distinct style. This music was characterized by lyrical melodies in the middle register as well as highly arpeggiated passages that dip down to some of the lower partials on the harmonic series. A great example of this style of music in the solo repertoire is the Beethoven Horn Sonata in F. This piece was written in 1800, and you can see that it has melodies written in the middle register as well as this highly arpeggiated section that dips down into some of the lower harmonics. Although this style of music isn't what you would consider low horn playing today, it is important to point out that this was a distinct style of music written for the low horn player at the time. Because with the introduction of valve technology to the horn, this all changes. Valve technology allowed the horn player to play every chromatic note with an open tone without the use of the right hand in the bell. It also gave us access to all of the chromatic notes in between the lower partials of the harmonic series. And so what I'm about to play are partials number 4, 3, and 2 on the open F horn. With the valves, we now have access to every note in between all of those partials. So that was partial number 2 on the F horn. Using the valves, we can actually get an entire octave lower than that now. And that's my best attempt at getting a low C. That's all I got. Sorry about you. And so the valve technology opened up a whole new world of possibilities and virtuosity in the lower register. And so composers started writing for more chromatic passages in the low range. One of the earliest composers to take advantage of the valve technology is Robert Schumann. In his famous Concertstück for 4 horns and orchestra and his solo piece Adagio and Allegro, he utilizes the chromatic low notes now available with the valves. You can hear in the following example of the slow section of the Adagio and Allegro by Robert Schumann that the horn soars up to a high C and then a couple of phrases later has a chromatic passage in the low range. This piece represents the compositional trend of composing for the expansive range of the horn. Other composers that follow suit are Alexander Glazunov with his Reveries and Camille Saint-Saëns with Morceau de Concert. While these pieces have great moments in the lower register that take advantage of the valve technology and the chromatic notes that we now have access to, they are in no way considered a part of the low horn solo repertoire. And so the situation was, because of the valve technology, composers could have been writing these bad booty, virtuosic, low horn solo pieces. But instead, they were obsessed with writing for the entire expansive range of the horn, which is totally okay. No harm done, because we got a lot of standard solo repertoire out of that era that we know and love today. That does mean there's a huge void in the repertoire going from the mid-19th century up until the early 20th century of virtuosic pieces for the low hornist. Specialization did exist to a certain degree in the orchestral repertoire though, although not in the same sense as the cor alto and cor bass player of the 18th century. If you've ever played any of the music by some of the great composers of the late 19th century, you know what I'm talking about. Bruckner, Brahms, Mahler, Strauss, they all composed music for first and third horn being high horn players, and second and fourth being low horn players. And even though the specialization did exist, every player in the section still had to play in the high range, and every member of the section had to play in the low range. One of the first low horn solo pieces that we get out of the 20th century comes from the pen of the Danish composer Carl Nielsen. He composed his Canto Serioso in 1913 after the announcement of a low horn audition for the Royal Danish Orchestra. This piece, as you can see, is a low horn piece in the fact that it just doesn't go too high. It was meant to test candidates' abilities in sustaining low notes and producing a beautiful characteristic sound in the middle register, but it's not virtuosic by any means. The lowest passages in the piece are few and far between, and it does not utilize the chromatic notes that were now available with the valves. A piece that does show off virtuosity in the low range is the Neuling Bagatelle. Just take a look at how technically challenging this piece is in comparison with the Canto Serioso by Carl Nielsen. This piece truly showcases the virtuosity available to the low horn players since the addition of valves to the horn. And this piece was composed in 1956, and just think about that for a second. We had valves for like 100 years at this point, and this is the first piece to truly show off the virtuosity available to the low horn player. And even though this piece was composed in 1956, it wasn't even well known until 1984, when it was suggested to be the solo low horn piece for the 1984 Berlin Philharmonic audition, which, by the way, Fergus McWilliams won, who we all know and love. If you don't know who Fergus McWilliams is, he just retired from the Berlin Phil, and he has a really wonderful book called Blow Your Own Horn. And even though it's not really related to this video, I'm going to drop a link to his book down in the description of this video just because I think it's so awesome. But the point that I really want to drive home is that for over 100 years, the horn had access to all of these chromatic low notes that could have produced really amazing virtuosic low horn solo pieces. But that repertoire does not exist. And as a student, I really fell in love with the low register of the horn. I would always bring in trombone etudes to my lesson, and I just loved that you could mold the sound of the lower register the same way that you could the high register. And so going to regional workshops or attending guest master classes, I was always on the hunt to hear in performances great low horn solos that I could program myself. But really none existed, and every once in a while you would hear the Canto Serioso or the Neuling Bagatelle. And Denise Tryon and her work as a low horn solo commissioner is a remedy to this problem. On her album Solo, which came out in 2015, she commissioned 4 new low horn pieces that truly show off virtuosity in the low register. Before I tell you about these pieces and what makes them so special, I do want to share a little bit of information about Denise Tryon and her work. Denise Tryon is well known for her outstanding career as an orchestral musician and a pedagogue. She is the former 4th horn player of the Philadelphia Orchestra and has also held positions in Columbus, Baltimore, and Detroit. As a pedagogue, she is currently the horn professor at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. Before this appointment, she taught at the Peabody Institute at Johns Hopkins University from 2007 until 2018. This substantial career has made her well known in the horn community and beyond, but But I think what makes her so special and an important figure in promoting solo works for the low hornist is her online presence and unique branding. This is represented well in her YouTube videos, and if you haven't seen her YouTube channel, you have to check it out. She has videos that are really useful, and they're just really professionally well done. On her channel, she has low horn excerpts of the month, where she goes through a low horn excerpt, talks about some of the things that a committee would be listening for, and then she plays it. If you click on the button at the top of this video, it will take you to her YouTube channel, where you can check out some of her low horn excerpts of the month, as well as some of her other content. Denise also has a unique and somewhat quirky personal brand. She's active on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and posts pictures with her little octopuses, Akakovich and Octavius. These guys are just kind of a cute, fun way for her to show where her travels take her as a performer and guest teacher. So Denise has created an outstanding career as a low horn specialist and is popular through her YouTube channel and social media platforms. This makes her an ideal ringleader in commissioning new solo pieces for the low hornist. She began her first commissioning project in 2013, and a year later, 4 new solo low horn pieces were finished. She recorded all of these works on her album Solo, which was released in 2015. And now I would love to introduce these pieces to you. The first commission I'd like to introduce to you is Brett Miller's Hunting Songs. This is a great solo for students wishing to work on their lower register for a few reasons. The first is that it's relatively short in length. The total duration of a performance is about 7 minutes long. The range of the solo does not go above a C in the staff, so it really allows students to just focus in on their low range. And the melodies and rhythms that Miller uses throughout the piece are simple and straightforward. This piece is also great for recitals, as it is programmatic in nature. The piece is divided into 3 movements, each depicting a bird of prey. The first, a crow, the second, an owl, and the third, a falcon. The first movement depicts a crow as a sinister, thieving creature on its search for prey. Miller uses a lyrical melody in C minor with large leaps and stepwise motion, and this stepwise motion really contributes to a menacing, creepy character. The flowing eighth notes that you hear in the piano part represent the relentlessness of the crow's search for his prey. The second movement is more sustained, as it portrays an owl perched, quietly scanning the night for his prey. The quarter note movement that you hear in the horn part depicts the slow turning back and forth of the owl's head as he searches in the night for movement. You'll also hear crunchy, colorful chords descending down to a low C in the piano's music that help depict this nighttime atmosphere. And the third movement portrays a falcon flying high in the sky, swirling and soaring on his search for prey. There is a recurring melodic gesture of 3 eighth notes followed by 2 duple eighth notes, and this duple eighth note pattern slows the rhythm of the melody down as to depict the hiccup in the falcon's flight from the occasional wing flap. The climax happens towards the end of this movement, and Miller uses short chromatic runs to depict the falcon falling out of the sky to capture his prey, and then he immediately disappears back into the sky. Because this piece is relatively short in length, it does not go above a C in the staff, and it uses simple melodies and rhythms, this is a great piece for the intermediate horn player. A Door into the Dark by Peter Askim is a single movement through composed work for low horn, based in part on a poem by Seamus Heaney called The Forge. This poem describes a blacksmith and the creative process of metalworking, and the composer, Askim, drew the connection between the strenuous labor of a metalworker and the strenuous labor that we put in the practice room to make art ourselves. The composer also drew the connection between the hammers on a piano and the hammer that a blacksmith would use to shape metal. Askim took inspiration from the vocal music of Richard Strauss, and it shows. The horn's melodies are in styles that reflect recitative and arias in opera. The first excerpt we'll listen to, you can hear how the horn's melody sounds like a bass singer could be singing it, and you may even be able to imagine some of Heaney's text. Before we listen to examples from the piece, I'd like to read The Forge by Seamus Heaney. All I know is a door into the dark. Outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring. The unpredictable fantail of sparks or hiss when a new shoe toughens in water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, horned as a unicorn, at one end square, set there immovable, an altar, where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes, leather-aproned, hairs in his nose, he leans out on the jamb, recalls a clatter of hoofs where traffic is flashing in rows, then grunts and goes in with a slam and a flick to beat real iron out to work the bellows. There's also a section that is reminiscent of recitative style of opera. The horn has repeated notes and ambiguous rhythms. If you look specifically at measure 94, you'll see how the composer uses accelerated rhythmic units to create a sense of intensity of emotion in the piece. I imagine the blacksmith almost in rage, vigorously hammering out a piece of metal to make his art. The single movement through composed low horn solo is a great addition to the repertoire. No extended techniques are used in this piece, but the facility required in the lower register does make this piece appropriate for advanced players. And the last piece that I want to introduce to you is Irremediable Breakdown by Nathan Pawelek. This might be my favorite commission by Denise Tryon because while all of her commissions are programmatic, I think this one is especially effective at telling a story through music. The piece is basically commentary on a marriage that does not work out and ends in divorce. The composer tells this story through 4 movements called Wakening, Lament, Romanza, and Irreconcilable Differences. The first movement is quite short and sets the mood for our story with piano music that is in the style of an alarm. This wakes our main character, the horn. And to me, the horn's music at the beginning is totally grumpy man music. It starts out agitated but then quickly goes to sighing gestures that portray a man finally turning off the alarm clock, sitting up in bed, and giving out an exasperated sigh. This sigh is depicted by the horn's slide down to the low note at the end of the first phrase. The second movement is more lyrical. It's called Lament, and that's exactly what it is, a sad song about how miserable and lonely our main character is. It shows off lyricism in the lower register really well and is accompanied by beautiful chords in the piano. The third movement of Irremediable Breakdown, Romanza, tells the story of our main character meeting the love of his life in an unexpected romance. This is another section of beautiful melodies, but this time much more hopeful than the lament that precedes it. This section ends with the piano having music that sounds like church bells ringing, and it depicts our couple finding love and getting married. This movement actually isn't over yet though. Before we get to the fourth movement, Irreconcilable Differences, the piano comes back with our same alarm clock gesture from the beginning. And this is not a happy return of a first theme of a piece. Even though our couple is married now, we have our grumpy man music from the beginning. This music comes right after our church bell motive, so you can tell that we jump forward a little bit in time and we are clearly out of the honeymoon phase. And this sets us up for our last section of this piece, Irreconcilable Differences. And for those of you out there who have not gone through a divorce, irreconcilable differences is one of the legal terms you use whenever you're filing for divorce. The composer uses asymmetric meter as well as juxtaposed groupings of eighth notes to depict the bickering and arguing between our couple. Another interesting thing about the last movement of this work is that the composer brings back the love theme from the Romanza section. This represents our couple trying to work out their differences, but at the end of that section, the horn comes in abruptly as if to say, nope, this is not going to work out. The end of this piece is quite technically challenging and depicts the breakdown of our couple. They disagree to a point that at the very end, they agree to disagree. This piece does use a little bit of extended techniques as it has a stopped horn section as well as pitch bends in the lower register. Because of this and the technique required in some of the 16th note passages, this piece is appropriate for the advanced player. The next piece I'd like to introduce to you is River Melos by Andrea Clearfield. This piece evokes images of the Roaring Fork River in Aspen, Colorado. The agitated sections of this piece portray the cascading white waters that Clearfield heard outside of her window while practicing piano as a student at the Aspen Music Festival. The slower, more melodic sections allude to the calmer stretch of the river near the home studio where Clearfield began composing the work in 2013. As you listen, you'll hear asymmetric meter and various groupings of eighth notes in the music of the piano. The horn's music sustains above these flowing eighth notes. To me, this music mimics a leaf floating down a stream, twirling on top of the water. Later, we can hear how Clearfield depicts the cascading white waters with louder, more technically challenging sections of the music. There's a written out cadenza in the horn part towards the end of the piece, and this portrays the widening and broadening of a river into an expansive lake. The horn player should take care to pace this cadenza in such a way to depict that broadening and calming of the river. Some of the 16th note passages in this piece are quite tricky, and the range is also very expansive, going from a low E to a high B flat. This piece also requires soft, stopped horn playing, as well as pitched bends achieved with the right hand. For these reasons, this piece is suitable for an advanced player.